Welcome to Party, April 29th, 2026. Today we're diving into something that's absolutely critical for anyone dealing with vendor security assessments, SOC 2 Type 2 reports. Now, if you're in IT, security, or procurement, you've probably seen these reports thrown around like they're some kind of security gold standard. But here's the thing. Not all SOC 2 Type 2 reports are created equal. And honestly, most people don't know how to properly review them. We're going to break down what you actually need to look for, why these reports can be misleading, and how to do a real third-party security review that actually protects your organization. So let's start with the basics, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what SOC 2 Type 2 actually means. SOC 2 stands for Service Organization Control 2, and it's an auditing standard that evaluates a company's information systems relevant to security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Type 2 specifically means they're testing the operating effectiveness of controls over a period of time, usually 6 to 12 months. Now, on paper, this sounds great. A third-party auditor comes in, tests your controls, and gives you a clean report. But here's where it gets tricky. The scope and rigor of these audits can vary dramatically. The first major issue is scope limitation. When you get a SOC 2 Type 2 report, you need to carefully read what systems and processes are actually covered. I've seen reports that only cover a tiny slice of a company's infrastructure, maybe just their main application server, while completely ignoring their development environment, third-party integrations, or even their employee workstations. It's like getting a security audit of just your front door while leaving all your windows wide open. The report might say, "No exceptions noted." But that doesn't mean the entire organization is secure. You really need to map the scope of the audit against what systems will actually have access to your data. Another huge red flag to watch for is the audit firm itself. Not all audit firms are created equal when it comes to SOC 2 reviews. Some of the smaller or less experienced firms might not have the technical depth to really understand modern cloud architectures or emerging security threats. I've seen SOC 2 reports where the auditors clearly didn't understand containerization, microservices, or even basic cloud security principles. They're checking boxes on a compliance framework that was designed years ago, but they're not really evaluating whether the security posture makes sense for today's threat landscape. So when you're reviewing a SOC 2 report, take a look at who the audit firm is and whether they have relevant experience in your industry or with similar technology stack. Now, let's talk about something that really frustrates me, the exceptions and how they're presented. Every SOC 2 Type 2 report will have a section on exceptions, which are basically instances where controls didn't work as expected during the audit period. But here's the thing, how these exceptions are described and contextualized can be incredibly misleading. I've seen reports where a critical security control failed multiple times, but it's buried in technical jargon or downplayed as a minor procedural deviation. You need to read these exceptions very carefully and understand their potential impact. If a company had a control failure that could have led to data exposure, that's not minor, regardless of how it's framed in the report. Here's something most people don't realize. SOC 2 Type 2 reports are point-in-time assessments, but they're often treated like ongoing certifications. The audit might have been conducted 6 months ago, and a lot can change in that time. New vulnerabilities could have been discovered. Staff could have turned over. Systems could have been updated or misconfigured. The report you're looking at might not reflect the current security posture at all. This is why I always recommend asking for the most recent report and understanding exactly when the audit period ended. If you're looking at a report that's more than a year old, it's probably not very useful for making current risk decisions. Let me give you a practical framework for actually reviewing these reports effectively. First, start with the scope section and map it against your specific use case. What systems will handle your data? Are those systems covered in the audit? Second, look at the trust services criteria that were evaluated. Security is just one of 5 possible criteria. Make sure the audit covered the areas that matter most to your risk profile. Third, read every single exception, no matter how minor it seems. Try to understand the potential business impact, not just the technical details. And finally, look at the remediation status. Did the company fix the issues that were identified, or are they still outstanding? But here's my biggest piece of advice. Don't rely solely on SOC 2 Type 2 reports for your third-party risk assessment. These reports should be one input among many. You should also be doing your own security questionnaires, reviewing their incident response history, checking for any public security disclosures, and potentially conducting your own penetration testing if the relationship is critical enough. I've seen organizations get burned because they treated a clean SOC 2 report as a comprehensive security validation, only to discover major vulnerabilities that weren't covered in the audit scope. There's also the business relationship aspect that often gets overlooked. When you're reviewing a SOC 2 Type 2 report, think about the incentives at play. The vendor paid for this audit. They chose the audit firm and they had significant input into the scope. While auditors are supposed to be independent, there's still an inherent bias toward presenting the organization in the best possible light. This doesn't mean the reports are useless, but it does mean you need to read them with a critical eye and supplement them with your own due diligence. Ask tough questions about anything that seems unclear or incomplete. One area where I see a lot of confusion is around the different trust services criteria. Security is the most common one, but there's also availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Depending on your use case, you might care more about availability than security, or privacy might be your primary concern. Don't just assume that a security-focused SOC 2 report covers everything you need. If you're dealing with personal data, make sure privacy controls were evaluated. If uptime is critical to your business, availability should be in scope. The criteria that were evaluated should align with your actual risk concerns, not just what the vendor decided to audit. Let's talk about some red flags that should make you dig deeper. If a SOC 2 Type 2 report has no exceptions at all, that's actually suspicious. No organization has perfect controls, and a good audit should identify at least some areas for improvement. If there are 0 exceptions, it might mean the audit wasn't rigorous enough or the scope was too narrow. Another red flag is vague or overly technical language in the exceptions section. If you can't understand what went wrong or why it matters, that's a problem. A good SOC 2 report should be accessible to business stakeholders, not just technical experts. Here's something that might surprise you. The size and reputation of the vendor doesn't necessarily correlate with the quality of their SOC 2 report. I've seen Fortune 500 companies with sloppy limited scope audits, and I've seen small startups with comprehensive, well-executed SOC 2 assessments. Don't let brand recognition substitute for actual due diligence. Read the report carefully, regardless of who it's from. Sometimes the smaller companies are actually more thorough because they're trying harder to prove their security posture to potential customers. Now let's get practical about what you should do with this information. When you're evaluating a third-party vendor, request their most recent SOC 2 Type 2 report, but also ask for additional documentation. Get their security questionnaire responses, ask about their incident response procedures, and find out about any security certifications or compliance frameworks they follow beyond SOC 2. If possible, speak directly with their security team, not just their sales team. You want to understand their security culture and practices, not just their compliance posture. And always verify that the audit scope aligns with how you plan to use their services. The bottom line is this. SOC 2 Type 2 reports are valuable tools, but they're not magic bullets for third-party risk management. They're one piece of a larger puzzle, and you need to understand their limitations to use them effectively. Don't let a clean SOC 2 report give you false confidence, and don't dismiss a vendor just because they have some exceptions in their report. What matters is understanding the real risk to your organization and making informed decisions based on complete information. Take the time to read these reports carefully, ask the right questions, and supplement them with your own risk assessment activities. Your organization's security depends on it. That's our deep dive into SOC 2 Type 2 report reviews. The key takeaway here is that compliance doesn't equal security, and a report is only as good as the scope and rigor of the audit behind it. Do your homework, read the fine print, and never rely on a single assessment to make critical security decisions. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep questioning those compliance reports.